Well, hello, it's me, Pimply Pete. Hey, what's a degenerate and why do people keep talking about it in the comment section of each and every video I make, and some videos I didn't make? Everyone seems so convinced that I'm one of those, that I'm that thing. Is that something that I should be concerned about? Is it something I should consult with my doctor about? Do I need some sort of injection? These are the questions I'm setting out to answer today. Quick note, the word degenerate sucks, but I don't care if you use it. If you think this is going to be some impassioned plea to get you to file degenerate in the same category as the N-word or whatever, sorry to disappoint. In the past, I've spent far too much effort on attempts to police the literal words people use, rather than the ideas those words represent. Words are not magic talismans that manifest changes to reality. Simply saying the word degenerate, as I have said it 4 times in this video already, does not in and of itself cause harm. But I also think it's silly to suggest that the word, any word for that matter, is just a word. Words convey meaning. Words are little mouth sounds we make that transmit things from our brains to the brains of others. Salad, pill, dog, mountain. These are all words. Each one conveys an idea from me to you, and most of you probably can't help but visualize a word, any word or small collection of words, your dad naked farting into a tuba, that I say. If you're going to be throwing around the word degenerate willy-nilly, when watching this video, I would ask that you consider what that word in particular communicates and whether that is something you intended. So according to Merriam-Webster, the word degenerate, in the sense that we'll be looking at it today, is defined thusly. Degenerate, noun. A, one degraded from the normal moral standard. B, a sexual pervert. C, in anthropology, one showing signs of reversion to an earlier cultural stage. Well, golly gee, that doesn't sound so bad. Why am I getting my panties all in a twist about the word degenerate if that's all it is? But like, okay, most of these make sense. To degenerate means the reverse of generating. To revert, to degrade. Sure. But how does a sex pervert do that? Like, speaking as a bona fide sex creep, what is being reverted to an earlier state or degraded by someone jerking it to people sitting on birthday cakes or whatever? For that matter, what does it mean to degrade from the normal moral standard? In order for that to make sense, you'd have to view morality as, like, solved. You'd have to be able to agree not simply on an objective system of morality, but also how it's measured and what the average amount of morality points a society has in order to see if any one person is above or below the standard. For that matter, what is the normal standard? Is it the one most people agree with, or is there some objectively neutral, observable moral standard that we could discover through rigorous testing? Neither of those answers really feels sufficient to me. If it's the one most people agree with, that's always changing. Could you, without changing, go from being a degenerate to being normal if society's morals changed with you? If there's an objective morality that we can discover, how will we know when we found it? What will we compare it to? And since we probably haven't found it yet, how could we say that anything is degenerate without knowing what normal morality is? And to say that someone has reverted to an earlier cultural stage implies a linear progression of cultures from least to most good. How do we decide which culture is more good or more advanced or whatever? And how do we know that those things are necessarily synonymous? So it might help to see how the word is used. Here's Paul Joseph Wormtongue using it a whole bunch.
Degeneracy is a broad topic, but at its core you'll find alcohol is a putrid, visceral onslaught against everything that's pure and decent. But Brits aren't content with keeping their degeneracy in-house. No, no, no. They export it all over the world. It is not the young people that degenerate. They are not spoiled till those of mature age are already sunk into corruption. Another reason why we appear to be more susceptible to degeneracy than ever is that we have too much time on our hands. Did you hear about this new sexual fetish? Couples repeatedly getting pregnant, then having multiple abortions. What a time to be alive. Question regarding abortions and breeding fetish.
Okay, so to be degenerate seems to mean like not being traditional or drinking too much or people making up stories about fucked up sex fetishes on the internet, because none of that happened. It's definitely people writing stories to jerk off. You're an adult, I don't understand how you don't get that. Now this video is just Paul complaining about people claiming to still be conservative while still having some vaguely progressive social views. things as mild as not being religious or smoking weed. It's less of a treatise on degeneracy, but rather an extremely online weirdo trying to gatekeep who gets to call themselves conservative, as though that somehow is the axis around which society flourishes or collapses. That's less helpful than I might have thought it would be, so let's look at how the word was used historically. It goes a little like this. The Industrial Revolution starts popping off, and that creates a new class of people who own factories and shit, and aren't necessarily nobility, but they get most of the money anyway. And all of the kings and dukes and such are like, haha, thanks for the taxes, suckers. And the new class of people, who we'll call the bourgeois, were like, hey, fuck this! Fuck this entirely. Hey everybody, yo, listen up. We're all the same. Everybody has the same rights. We learned that from all of the science we did in the Enlightenment. And everybody else was like, oh yeah, for real? Everybody's the same, even women? No. Nice try. All men were created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And then everybody else was like, oh, for real? Okay, well, I guess we should stop enslaving people in the colonies and stealing all their shit. And then the bourgeois were like, no. Okay, let me explain. Those actually aren't people. When I say people, I mean a different thing. And then everybody else is like, well, in the Bible it says everybody's descended from Adam and Eve, so they gotta be people, dog. And then this dude named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was like, yo, get this, everybody. I got it. I figured it out. Basically, you know how babies look like their parents? I know why that is now. The stuff you do changes what your children inherit from you, which is why when super jacked people have babies, their babies are jacked as shit, right? And everybody was like, that makes sense to me. And then Chucky Darwin was like, yo, I just saw some fucked up turtles on an island and I figured out everybody used to be apes. Not a direct quote. Okay, fine, said the bourgeois. So then, if everybody used to be apes or is descended from Adam and Eve or whatever the fuck, and everybody can't be the same because that makes it pretty fucked up that we stole all land and resources and killed a bunch of people, that everybody... What must have happened then is that they were like us, but their fucked up cultures and the way they were acting made their minds inferior to ours through Lamarckian evolution. Yeah, that sounds good. Anyway, everyone has rights, but we still get to own everything. And that worked pretty well for them, with a few side effects. The idea that some humans were genetically superior to others gave rise to eugenics, a pseudoscience whereby people attempted to deliberately meddle in human evolution to create better people, which basically meant killing or sterilizing anyone they thought wasn't superior enough. But more on topic, it gave rise to social degeneration theory, the idea that great civilizations give way to libertine decadence over time, causing them to collapse. Now, these ideas aren't entirely separate, because it was the assumption that as societies collapsed, people became biologically worse. And as people's biology became worse, this hastened societal collapse, creating a feedback loop. So therefore, the more advanced you were as a culture, the more biologically superior you were as a race. And you'll notice that this argument was mainly made by people who already considered themselves to be a more advanced culture. The Nazis hated modern art, which they referred to as degenerate art, for this reason. They believed that it represented some sort of failure to live up to the standards of traditional art, and came from enfeebled artists who lacked the skill to create art by traditional technical standards. That art might be more than simply a way to demonstrate one's technical mastery as a proxy for their racial superiority seems to have escaped them. Such degenerate art would have a degenerative influence on the culture, removing the standard of mastery which young artists had previously struggled to maintain, and giving way to lax attitudes. Furthermore, the social attitudes of the type of person who created this art would be dangerous, something that we shouldn't let people be moved or inspired by. But it's worth noting that you find this attitude, albeit perhaps less explicitly, in all sorts of non-Nazi places. Well, music these days isn't like it used to be. It's made by phonies or criminals. It's making kids shallow or delinquent. Pull up your pants or turn your hat the right way around. Who knows what kind of society we're going to be living in 100 years if people's hats are slightly askew. It's just not logical to wear a hat that way. We've already figured out how to wear hats. And of course, none of this has anything to do with the fact that most of the people wearing their hats that way are a different color than me. It's just that I feel very strongly about hats. Social degeneration theory imagines that the cultural and evolutionary process is a straight line. You start at the least complex, or least powerful, or worst, or whatever, end of the spectrum, and the process is meant to iterate forward towards a more perfect state. To degenerate, then, is to move backwards along that spectrum, to move towards the simpler or worse end of the spectrum, thereby stalling progress towards the perfect end. Now, a couple of problems should leap out at you with that model right away. That's not how evolution, either biological or cultural, works. There is no perfect biological creature, except my wife, and there is no perfect culture. There couldn't be. What would that even mean? How could you measure a culture's progress towards perfection without relying on the values of your culture? What would you even be measuring? How could you possibly say one culture is better than another? And like, most people get that on an intuitive level. I think it's relatively easy for most people to recognize that, say, modern technology doesn't necessarily mean we live in a superior society compared to our ancestors. Of course not, right? Like, technology comes with all sorts of problems and gives a dangerous amount of power to a vanishingly small contingent of people. Cave dwellers never had to deal with the threat of man-made climate change or nuclear oblivion. But on the other hand, they're not a superior society either because they never got to play erotic visual novels. So there are trade-offs either way. And it's not like we're necessarily smarter or know more than they did. Because it feels a lot of the time like every time we discover something, turns out some ancient culture already had it like 1,000,000 years ago. The march of progress isn't a straight line. It sometimes doubles back on itself and rediscovers technologies that people already figured out somewhere. I'm not saying that the Aztecs had the internet. I'm not saying it. But there's compelling evidence, for example, that antibiotics were deliberately cultivated and consumed in North Africa 1,000 years before we discovered them in the West. But there is a tendency to view culture as having advanced in a linear way morally, or in how we think about stuff. How many times have you heard someone's thinking referred to as backwards? Today we value things like plurality, freedom, reason, equality, etc. in ways that our ancestors might not have. And to us, these seem like advancement. We're advancing away from the things we don't value towards the things that we do. But every culture would feel this way, no matter what it believed, because every culture moves away from what it doesn't value and towards what it does. That's what it means to value something. From the perspective of someone who didn't share these values, it would seem like things were going in the wrong direction. In order for one to believe that we were progressing or regressing along the axis of most bad to most good, you'd have to believe that there was some yardstick by which one could objectively measure a civilization's worth, and there isn't. You can only measure it against what your society values. And of course we've advanced to what your society values because your society exists in the present. And in terms of biological evolution, like, give me a fucking break. Evolution doesn't make creatures better or stronger. It makes them more suited to their environment. Great white sharks didn't stop evolving because they became more perfect, but because there wasn't a lot of pressures from their environment to do it. Evolution isn't like in Pokemon. It isn't always a step towards a more powerful form. Hey everybody, this is Matt, cutting in here because I know how the internet works, and if I didn't make this clarification, it's all I'd hear about in the comments. I'm aware that there are some Pokemon who become technically less powerful if evolved or evolved too early. Some of them learn different moves when they evolve that aren't as good. Okay, I get it. You're all big nerds and I hate you. Back to the show. Evolution is the process of mutation and natural selection. You have genes which run little gene software to make your body. You pass along those genes to your offspring. Sometimes there's an oopsie, and the genes do something they weren't supposed to, and you've got a mutant on your hands, baby! Most of the time this is either negligible or bad, but sometimes, through the sheer law of large numbers, you end up with a mutant that has some sort of advantage in their environment. That means that mutant is more likely to pass on its genes than others of its species, and likewise, any offspring which inherit their mutation. In other words, evolution requires deviation. If evolution reached some state of perfection, something which accounted for and capitalized on all environmental pressures, evolution would cease. When new mutations arose, they would be selected out. Understood this way, perfection means stagnation. And I think this is where the theory of social degeneration kind of falls apart. Proponents of social degeneration theory seem to think we should enforce strict moral codes in order to prevent the sort of decadence they believe causes societies to collapse. This is what Paul was arguing in his video, that the role of conservatives is to preserve and thus enforce traditional values. That things must be kept within certain boundaries of acceptability, and to go beyond them inevitably reverts us backwards. But from an evolutionary standpoint, deviance is required. Deviation is the engine that drives evolution. It's the only way to move forward. To try to freeze things in place and remove anything which deviates from the norm means we can't progress forwards, we can only stay the same or get worse. To solve this problem, they'll often pick some point in our history when we were supposedly at our best, and then argue we must return to the values which we had at that point, and make ourselves and our civilization as great as it was then. To make America great. Weirdly, they usually go for ancient Rome or Sparta, both of which would have been incredibly shitty places to live, but that's what they like, because it was... They think everybody had big muscles or some shit. But the inherent contradiction in this way of thinking is that if those civilizations declined, recreating the conditions that led to those civilizations also recreates the conditions which led to their decline. It is a philosophy of regression. It does not allow the possibility that things can change for the better. We're in a perpetual state of achieving our past glories before once again sinking into barbarism. And some people on the far right actually embrace this outlook and view history as a cycle between these two extremes. A perpetual shift between weak, strong, authoritarian, libertine, good, evil. At best, we can purge modernity and return to the wisdom of our ancestors, but inevitably, our greatness is exploited and diminished by bad actors, and a new cycle of purging must begin. Your only hope is that you live on the right side of that coin flip. But to me, that feels very myopic. There is no returning to the past. The past no longer exists and cannot be recreated. It can be learned from, it can be instructive, but the past is dead. Any attempts to return to our prelapsarian roots will fail. But that's okay, because the truth is, we were never better. There is no getting better or worse, there's just change. And change isn't always destructive. Some changes are good. Some changes make things better. And if you want that, if you want things to get better, you have to be willing to risk that they might get worse. In the long run, though, I think that things tend to get better because we get to choose which changes stick and which don't. The good ones, the ones we like, stick. The bad ones, the ones we don't, revert back eventually. That's how cultures evolve. The beauty of it is that we don't need to consciously guide that process, just like we don't need to consciously choose which music becomes the most popular. The music most people like will become most popular on its own, and the music that people don't like won't. Attempting to guide that process just freezes you in time. It's saying, we've figured out the correct way to be. And like, how do you know there isn't a better way to be that you're missing out on? I would argue that a necessary prerequisite for the correct way to be is that people would need to agree with it. Like, how else would you know it's correct? So if you have to enforce it, if you have to punish people for failing to recognize it, if you have to excise and kill people who disagree, doesn't exactly sound like the natural emergent morality you claim it is. That every other culture that has attempted to do this appears ridiculous, arbitrary, and cruel in hindsight. The Inquisition likewise thought that they had achieved the most advanced and morally pure culture of their time, and it was their job to protect it from the dangerous deviants who wanted to upset the apple cart with dangerous ideas like letting lay people read the Bible. To sum up, the word degenerate expresses some pretty fucked up attitudes. It means that someone is either biologically or culturally backwards, and implies that there is a causal link between cultural and biological inferiority. Do I think that this is what most people mean when they say it? No. Clearly not. Chill out for a second. I'm not canceling anybody, just relax. But it does provide cover for the people who definitely do mean it that way. The people who want a foot in the door to discuss eugenics or authoritarian social control measures. Or how having the best cell phones makes us the Ubermensch or whatever pseudoscientific nonsense helps make them feel better about themselves. It suits their agenda that a concept like that is used by normies. It helps popularize their fucked up excuses to start killing people they don't like. So maybe that's something we should think about. Hey everybody, no Solidarity Corner this week. For some reason, my eyeballs fell out of my skull. So that seems like an ominous precursor of things to come. But I'm trying not to think about it. Hey, if you liked the video, why don't you go ahead and press the like button and also subscribe here for new videos every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want more videos like this from me, but instead of being about just whatever I talk about, like politics usually, but other stuff sometimes, I do videos that are about horror movies over at youtube.com/ScaredyCatsTV every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, I do streams every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on YouTube and at twitch.tv/ThoughtSlime. Hey, but what also about the people giving me money? If they want to do that, they can do it at patreon.com/ThoughtSlime. No press, no biggie, not a big deal.